Welcome to Those Were the Days. I'm Nancy Martin, the library archivist. The topic of today's program is coal mining in Peters Township. I'd like to thank regular participant Bob Moore for planting the seed for this presentation. This isn't intended to be a comprehensive history of coal mining in the township, but rather a sampling of the historical material that I have access to and that I thought you would find enlightening and/or entertaining. Anderson Mine Number 1 at Venetia opened in 1880. It was a drift mine, meaning the mine was horizontal. You could walk right into it. There was no vertical shaft. Anderson Mine Number 1 was owned by Peters Township resident Dr. David Anderson. In 1881, the mine produced more than 8,700 tons of coal. By 1894, it employed 170 workers. Dr. David Miller Anderson, the owner-operator of the Anderson and Eclipse mines in Venetia, was born in Beaver County in 1837. He led an adventurous life, accompanying his father to California in the early years of the gold rush, managing an English flour mill in Chile, and serving in the Civil War, eventually as an assistant surgeon of the 12th Regiment of U.S. Colored Infantry. Anderson graduated from Bellevue Medical College in New York City in 1866 and moved to Peters Township, where he began practicing medicine. He married Charity Wright, the daughter of the Reverend Joseph Wright, and his wife Catherine around 1867. In 1893 and again in 1899, Anderson represented Washington County in the PA legislature. In 1903, Anderson died of pneumonia at the age of 65. He is buried in Finleyville Cemetery. His obituary noted that, quote, he was one of the most prominent independent coal operators in the county. Dr. Anderson may be gone, but he is not forgotten. A stained glass window in Wright's United Methodist Church on Venetia Road is dedicated to his memory. It was given to the church by his wife, Charity Wright Anderson. Thank you to Kathy Jo Kernan, a member of the church, for taking these pictures and sharing them with me. The uniform that Dr. Anderson wore as an assistant surgeon in the Civil War, his medical bag, and his Grand Army of the Republic uniform are all on display on the second floor of the Wright House Museum of Western Expansion, operated by the Peters Creek Historical Society. I took these photographs while touring the house with Len Morosini this past fall. Thank you, Len. Here's an undated image of the Venetia mine tipple. In mining, a tipple is a structure at the mine surface used to receive, sort, clean, and load mined materials, usually coal, into railway cars or trucks for transport, often featuring chutes, screens, and conveyors to prepare the product for market. Anderson Mine Number 2, known as the Eclipse Mine, was located on the old Wright property and between the Anderson Number 1 and Hackett mines. Here's an undated image of the Eclipse Mine. After Dr. Anderson died in 1903, his son-in-law David Reese, who was married to Anderson's daughter Elizabeth, who went by Bessie, took over the operation, and the mine became known as the Anderson-Reese Mine. There is no record of commercial operations at this mine after 1911. This is Dr. Anderson's daughter, Elizabeth Eleanor Anderson. Bessie, as she was known, married David Reese, who was originally from Wales, in 1902. The two were very active members of the Venetia community. Bessie was a charter member and first president of the Peters Township Society of Farm Women when it formed in 1918. Here on the left is a page from the Peters Township Society of Farm Women yearbook for 1919, which lists the society's officers. Mrs. David Reese is listed as president. On the right is a photograph of Bessie taken in the 1950s and labeled in a Society of Farm Women scrapbook as, quote, our first president. Thank you to Charlie and Tim Trax for donating the Farm Women scrapbooks to the archives back in 2024. Before we get back to the subject of mining, I wanted to share something I learned while researching the Andersons. This article, which appeared in the May 17th, 1948 edition of the Monongahela Daily Herald newspaper, reported that Elizabeth and David were living in the Wright house at this time. It also noted that in celebration of Wright's Methodist Church's 125th anniversary, an organ had been dedicated to the memory of Charity Anderson, Dr. Anderson's wife and Bessie Reese's mother. Unfortunately, members of the Wrights congregation tell me that this organ is long gone. This same article also stated that the new Wrights Church had been built using bricks from the original Wrights Chapel, which has been confirmed by members of the church. As well as being a one-time coal mine owner-operator, David Reese was the president of the First National Bank in Finleyville and of the Finleyville Planing Mill, a board member of the Finleyville Cemetery Association, a board member and trustee of Wright's Methodist Church, and past president of the Peters Township School Board. Shortly before his death in 1947, David and Bessie donated, quote, a plot of ground to be used as a community park and recreation site to the village of Venetia. This land is now known as Reese Park. The Hackett Mine was founded by Thomas Hackett in 1835. The Pittsburgh Coal Company bought the mine in 1900. Which brings us to the topic of coal mine consolidation. Beginning around the turn of the 20th century, small independent mine owner-operators such as David Anderson and Thomas Hackett were replaced by incorporated mining companies such as the Pittsburgh Coal Company. By 1909, the Pittsburgh Coal Company owned 11,553 acres of coal in Peters Township. The Pittsburgh Coal Company was incorporated in New Jersey in 1899 by leading Pittsburgh industrialists, including Andrew Mellon, Henry Oliver, and Henry Clay Frick. Although a New Jersey corporation, it operated only in the Pittsburgh area. At its inception, the company took control of more than 80 coal businesses and 80,000 acres of land on both sides of the Monongahela River. In 1915, the Pittsburgh Coal Company merged with the Monongahela River Consolidated Coal and Coke Company. In 1945, it merged with the Consolidation Coal Company, later Consol Energy. In 2025, Consol Energy and Arch Resources merged to form Core Natural Resources. Their combined 2023 revenues were approximately $5.7 billion. There can also be no talk of coal mines without talking about the rail lines that carried the coal to market. It was the Baltimore and Ohio, the B&O, that carried Hackett's and Venetia's coal to markets. The B&O's beautiful terminal building, seen here, was located on the north end of Pittsburgh's Smithfield Bridge. It was built in 1887 and demolished in 1954 during construction of the Penn Lincoln Parkway, otherwise known as U.S. Route 30. This article, taken from the September 10th, 1885 edition of the Monongahela Valley Republican newspaper and entitled Finleyville Coal District, reports that, quote, the coal business out of the Wheeling branch of the Baltimore and Ohio Road is very active. The article goes on to mention the Dr. Anderson mines, which it claims are, quote, running full and in very fair shape. The Gastonville mine, at which about 60 miners are working for 2.25 cents, the Pittsburgh and Peters Creek Coal Company, and a coal mine owned and operated by Henry Florsheim. The Montour Railroad Company was organized in 1877 to bring coal from mines near Imperial, Pennsylvania, to barges on the Ohio River at Coraopolis. Additional extensions were added to serve newly opened mines. The 35-mile extension looping through the South Hills was constructed in 1913 to 1914. Here is an undated photograph of a train crossing a bridge on the Montour Railroad in McMurray. Of course, with mining, there came mining injuries. Mining deaths were disturbingly common. When I searched the newspapers.com online database for the words, quote, miner killed, and limited results only to Washington County, Pennsylvania, and only to the years 1880 to 1905, only a 25-year period, I got 2,670 matches. This article from the October 28th, 1901 edition of Monongahela's The Daily Herald reports the deaths of two miners at Finleyville. Heartbreakingly, the first miner was unidentified and described simply as, quote, an unknown foreigner. The second miner, 28-year-old Joe Johnsick, was killed by, quote, a fall of slate, which was a common line in articles reporting mining deaths. Miners were lucky if they suffered only minor injuries at work. This is a doctor's note from the records of the Hackett Educational and Entertaining Slovenian Club. The letter was written by Dr. Schuster at Finleyville in 1910 on behalf of Frank Bauer, who sprained his wrist and so was, quote, unable to do his work as a miner. Letters such as this were submitted to employers and to benefit societies so that the injured workers could receive benefits while they were unable to work. Mine explosions also occurred. On Wednesday, April 23, 1913, the Cincinnati mine in Union Township exploded, leaving 96 men dead. Or, as one of my attendees said the other day, men and boys. According to the 1913 Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article seen here, the deaths of the 96 made 131 children orphans and 51 women widows. Miner Louis Vernosky of Hackett was reported to have left behind a wife and 10 children. The Cincinnati Mine Disaster historical plaque seen here, erected by the Peters Creek Historical Society, is located on Route 88 not far from Finleyville. The plaque marks what was known as the mule entrance to the Cincinnati mine. On to Montour Mine Number 4, which existed from 1914 until 1980. Montour Number 4 opened around 1913 to 1914 in conjunction with the expansion of the Montour Railroad into Peters Township. A new slope shaft and conveyor system were added in 1953, with the original shaft being used for personnel. Montour Number 4 was a top producer on the Montour Railroad, utilizing the 1914 built shaft and later the 1953 slope conveyor system to move over 20,000 cars of coal annually. This photograph and the ones that follow can be found on the Library of Congress website. They were taken at the mine by John Collier, an Office of War information photographer, in 1942. Coincidentally and appropriately, John Collier's last name is from the French word collier, which means coal miner. The images capture the gritty life of miners working in Montour Number 4 of the Pittsburgh Coal Company. Collier documented the underground life of the miners, including the laying of tracks, the deploying of machinery, drilling, and blasting. Here we have miners in the cage, ready to be lowered into the mine. These two miners are picking up safety lamps from the mine's lamp room. In case you're not familiar with safety lamps, because I was not, it turns out that before the 19th century, miners used open flames that had the potential to ignite the flammable gases inside mines, causing explosions. The flammable gas, known as fire damp, was colorless and odorless and consisted mainly of methane and was most often found in coal mines. Inventors, including Dr. William Reed Clanny, Sir Humphrey Davy, and George Stephenson, saw a need to provide miners with a safe light to use in gaseous mines. Safety lamps, such as the one seen here, were manufactured by a variety of companies from around 1815 until the 1930s. Most safety lamps included a glass enclosure around the flame for more effective lighting, mesh uppers to cool the flame, and a metal bonnet to better protect the flame from being extinguished by gusts or drafts in the mines. After the creation of battery-powered lamps, safety lamps continued to be used to detect gases in mines. And that is exactly what the miner is doing in this image, testing for the presence of flammable gas using a safety lamp. Here we have miners preparing to go down into Montour Mine Number 4. And here's a helpful sign on a safety door, informing the workers that work is fun and be careful, don't get hurt. Here are miners installing timber supports in the mine. And here the seemingly endless stacks of mine timbers with the company village in the background. These miners are drilling a hole for blasting, while this miner is detonating a stick of dynamite. These miners are breaking for lunch in the Montour Number Four's machine shop, which I can only imagine was at least a little bit cleaner than the mine itself. This miner is testing the stability of the tunnel roof. When I look at this picture, I can't help but think that if the roof isn't stable, his hand and the pickaxe holding onto the roof aren't going to be of very much help to him. Here, miners lay track for mine machinery. This is a section foreman and the assistant mine superintendent reviewing the day's work. While this photo shows the mine foreman waiting for everyone on the afternoon shift to arrive for work. And here we have mine engineers checking surveys after a day's work. In this image, the miners' wives are engaged in first aid training. The sign on the wall behind them reads, Ladies First Aid Station. Sorry, Ladies First Aid Team, Hill Station. I had to include this image because I just thought that the women's white dresses and bright surroundings provide such a contrast to the dark and dirty environment in which their miner husbands worked. This painting of miners eating lunch underground is by Creighton Hoddle, a 1949 graduate of Peters Township High School and still resident of the township. I did a display about the Peters Township High School class of 1949 late last year, and I had the opportunity to meet and speak with Creighton about his double life as a coal miner and artist. Creighton, who has no formal training in art, worked at the Montour Mine Number 4 as a miner and fire boss until its closing in 1980. His insider's perspective of the profession, combined with his realistic painting style, like the photographs we just saw, provide us with an insider's view of life in the coal mines. Note the safety lamp hanging in the upper right corner of the painting. Here's another painting of Creighton's, which is a self-portrait. This painting by Creighton, entitled Idle Shifts, won first place at the Bassetttown Arts and Crafts Festival in Washington, Pennsylvania in 1981. The painting is a still life consisting of boots, a hard hat, a miner's belt, a lunch pail, and a United Mine Workers Journal, all gathering dust as a result of the United Mine Workers of America national strike in 1981. In August of 1980, a barrier failed between Montour Mine Number 4 and the abandoned Montour Number 10 mine, causing severe flooding that led to the permanent closure of Montour Number 4. It was estimated that 40 million gallons of water a day were flooding into the mine. With the closure, 267 miners immediately lost their jobs. 83 mine employees were kept on temporarily for salvage operations. This article from the Pittsburgh Press described the flooded mine as, quote, a victim of subterranean inundation that's turning Number 4's vast labyrinth of caverns into a desolate underground lake. Creighton Hoddle, president of Montour Number 4's United Mine Workers Local 1198 at the time of the closure, observed, quote, it's terrible when a mine as old as this one, with a fine record of productivity and steady performance, meets an end like this. The former location of Montour Mine Number 4 along Valley Brook Road and the Montour Trail, formerly the Montour Railroad, is now home to Tar Self-Storage and Tom's Garage. Thank you to Brian Seep and the Montour Railroad website that provided the information for this slide. In these two images, you can see the portal for Montour number 4, dated 1953, on the hillside behind the tar storage building where the number 4 tipple previously stood. According to Brian, this is where the conveyor went into the hillside and down to the mine level where the rotary dumper was located. When the mine was closed, a cement truck pumped cement down the shaft during the sealing process. I would be remiss if I didn't at least briefly mention the effect of mine subsidence on Peters Township. As you know, the former Peters Township Middle School, Elm Grove School, and McMurray Elementary were all significantly damaged by mine subsidence and were closed in the 1980s and 1990s. Reed Day, who was attorney for the Peters Township School District, compiled an album of images documenting the damage suffered by district buildings as a result of mine subsidence. This image is of the damage to the exterior back wall of the middle school towards the McMurray School end, while this image is of damage to the boys' restroom, which was next to the faculty room in the middle school. Please note the wooden school rulers scanning the gap and being used to measure the width of the crack. I thought I'd conclude with a brief conversation about the Matthews Mine. The Pittsburgh Coal Company began construction of its largest underground mine, which was initially known as the Mingo Mine, in 1943. The mine started at the Monongahela River just north of New Eagle, Pennsylvania, utilizing the old workings of the Cincinnati, Courtney, and Star mines. In July 1944, the Mingo Mine was renamed the Matthews Mine after World War II hero Staff Sergeant Archie Matthews of Finleyville, who had been posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor and who had worked at the Champion Number 2 mine. I learned that the B-17 aircraft on which Archie served as a gunner was hit by a German bomber in February of 1944, killing the co-pilot and injuring the pilot. Archie took control of the damaged plane and flew it back to the airbase in Glatton, England, but no one left on board knew how to land it. The survivors were instructed to bail out, but Archie refused to leave the unconscious pilot. Archie and Lieutenant Walter Trumper, who also refused to abandon the plane, attempted to land the aircraft 3 times. Sadly, on the final attempt, it bounced off the runway and crashed, killing all 3 men still aboard. The Matthews Mine, at full operation, employed nearly 1,000 workers. It grew to encompass 47 square miles. An underground fire began at the mine's Thomas Portal on October 17, 1990. It was believed that the fire was caused by the collapse of the roof of coal containing the bare high-voltage wire that powered the locomotives. An attempt to douse the fire with 6 million gallons of water failed. The mine's 8 entrances and air shafts were sealed with steel and concrete caps in a 5-day effort in February of 1991 to smother the flames. The mine closed permanently in 2001. If you have an interest in learning more about coal mining in southwestern Pennsylvania, I recommend visiting the Coal Mining Room at the Wright Museum of Western Expansion, operated by the Peters Creek Historical Society. The Coal Mining Room, located on the 2nd floor, boasts a collection of artifacts donated to the Historical Society in 1980 by the family of retired coal miner William Jenkins. You could also visit the Tour Ed Mine and Museum in Tarentum, PA, which is a coal mining museum featuring a 160-foot deep mine where you can see equipment from previous eras. There is also the Coal and Coke Heritage Center on Penn State's Fayette campus in Lamont Furnace, PA, near Uniontown, and the Miners Memorial Museum in South Fork, Pennsylvania, near Johnstown, and Indiana University of Pennsylvania's Pennsylvania Coal Culture Exhibit, featuring the Rochester and Pittsburgh Coal Company collection. The exhibit catalog can be seen on the right and is available online. Thank you for joining me. Please join me again next month on Thursday, June 14th, when we will be talking about the Parent Teacher Association scrapbooks created by the parent teacher associations of various local schools between the 1950s and the 1990s. I think you'll find them surprisingly entertaining and enlightening.